everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar, and as always, I am your host as we kick off our 15th year. I'll just get a plug in at the start. We're having our 15th anniversary show at New Edmiston House on August the 15th. Tickets available from their website. Come along and see us. But to today's show, I thought I'd start off with a blast from the past, and of course, a stalwart of Heart and Hand. The latter being, of course, Mr. Adam Thornton. Hello, Adam.
Hello. You caught me off guard there. I was expecting the intro to be the other way around, but hello.
You've shown up for what, the last 5 years? Someone who hasn't
is
5 years off work, but he's back today and he'll be here regularly throughout the season. It's David Graham. Hello, David. You've been up to much in that 5 year?
Afternoon trips. Yeah, I thought when I would see Oasis live this summer that that was going to be the greatest comeback, but actually I think me getting back in the flagship has to be a close second. So yeah, listen, buzzing to be back, and it was far too long, and grateful to be here.
Good to have you, my man. So Rangers, of course, had a fixture at the weekend, took on Middlesbrough in a friendly. First of all, fantastic Middlesbrough turnout. I think they had something like 7,000 at it. But Adam, this struck me as a bit of a contractual obligation game, i.e. one that Russell Martin, I think, could have seen past. And I think the way that the summer has been arranged, which would have happened previously, because you need to start planning your pre-season, towards the start of the year. So it probably happened before everyone was in the building. But it seemed a bit, I liked some of the things, but just the order in which we did it. You would expect to be finishing up your friendlies before the Champions League game, and you would probably expect your toughest one, Bruges and Middlesbrough, to be towards the end. But we start off with Bruges really, really early. Then went to St George's Park, which I think was a great move, but then a couple of closed door ones, then this one. I don't think the summer will look like this next season.
No, I think he said himself, didn't he? It was maybe a little bit of management to do on it, and yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter where the opposition comes in pre-season, as long as he gets the minutes that he wants to get in. People, as long as he sees what he wants to see. Doesn't sound like he has seen what he wants to see certainly from the Ibrox friendlies. He's not really been shy about saying what's went wrong in those first halves and trying to get them fixed in the second. This one felt a little bit more like the real quiz, if you like, coming on later in the game. I think Rob Edwards said as well, they've got one or two good players that come on just as we were tiring. So that one felt a little bit pointed for us in terms of who played last midweek, getting them a half hour on the legs this weekend, and then hopefully going hell for leather on Wednesday. So in a way, I guess that maybe makes sense. But yeah, I don't think it was ideal, shall we say. But yeah, hopefully next year we'll get a clear run at it.
Davey, the manager, as Adam touched upon there, said he was quite disappointed in the first half. But there were players who, now let's face it, if you were starting the game at the weekend, you fell into one of three categories, which is need minutes, Gassama, youngster trying to make your way in the game, Hutton, guys like that, or you are a fringe player, Bajrami, etc. And he said he was disappointed from some of them that he didn't like the warm up. He said, and they didn't go into the game with a lot of energy. And it's the old catch-22. If you're a player and you're picked for this game, you're not playing Wednesday. Realistically, you didn't feature on Tuesday, but if you don't go out and show the manager something in that opportunity and you feel a bit sorry for yourself, and that was a phrase he used, felt a bit sorry for themselves, you're not going to impress them, are you?
No, well, I think if you recall the infamous friendly where Borna Barisic, Kyle Lafferty and was it Eros Grezna possibly all played against the Liverpool under-23s, and I think Borna was the only one out of three to essentially save his Rangers career, because I think he went into the gaffer's office after and apologised to Stephen Gerrard. So this is probably a fairly common theme across sort of professional football, where you're right, Davey, you start on Saturday because either the manager's had a word in your ear to say, look, take this opportunity, young lad, B, to say you need some minutes, or as you say, if you fall into that latter category, you probably have already decided, well, I'm not going to start on Wednesday, when probably you would be saying it's actually an opportunity to put your hand up, and why could you not start on Wednesday night? So it maybe says and reveals quite a bit to the manager about certain players. One thing I would say, Dave, is I think we can all agree that when you're in the earlier stages of European qualification, as we unfortunately are this year, there's limited benefit to having friendlies, because you have them behind closed doors. You win, great. You lose, whatever. You move on. But I think that you're sort of having to kind of reveal yourself and show your hand to an extent, and really gone are the days of being able to play sort of glamour friendlies against your big time European opposition. And I think you know Russell Martin, I think, A, will look to have a different pre-season next season if he is still the manager, and I think B, he will be hoping it's a different pre-season because we'll be in the latter stages of European qualification, hopefully.
Yeah, that'll make a big difference. Adam, so we've seen, two friendlies and one competitive game. What's been your take it tactically about what the manager has been trying to do? Very early stages, obviously.
I think, if I'm being honest, I hope we've not seen the full shebang, if you like, because we've been having to make do. I would say in arguably 4 positions, maybe even more than that. So yeah, I think the only area that I think it looks relatively settled, I guess, would be midfield in terms of what he wants to do. I think Joe Rothwell, have to admit, it was a bit of a surprise when we'd seen the training videos, etc., and he was sitting as that deeper number 6. But then speaking to journalists down in Leeds, watching him a little bit more, etc., it maybe doesn't make sense, because it maybe does make sense because it's a hugely important part of Russell Martin's style. Probably the most important part, I would say, is that number 6. How often have we spoke about the fact that we've not had a player in there who can receive the ball facing his own goal, turn and swivel and pass through, or ideally carry the ball through as well. Those are all big things that Joe Rothwell has. Okay, he hasn't particularly played that position very often, but coming to Rangers, probably getting another 10% more of the ball than he's had even at Leeds and Southampton, it maybe makes sense to have another player in there. Not really playing a kind of traditional defensive midfielder should be fine for Rangers in 60-70% of domestic games. So in a way, that kind of makes sense. I think that's a really important one. And I think how the other 2 midfielders, whether it's number 8s or whether we play a little bit further forward with one, I'm not sure, but how they sort of set up, if it's Diomande on one side and then Raskin or Asgard on the other side, who we've not seen much of at all yet, really. I don't think we've seen in an official game. So how he settles in, I think I can see how that might work. I think we've got a few interesting options in there. Lyle Cameron, who you probably don't expect to get huge amounts of starting game time, but I do think he would be able to come in and contribute for sure. You've still got Bayrami there, who the manager has spoken about as someone who was doing well for him, or he liked the look of. And again, playing in a more structured system might be a player that
I thought he was one, though, that the manager was referring to the weekend. Might be wrong, but
maybe, yeah. But in theory, I guess someone who likes the ball as a ball player, if you're playing in a structure that sort of takes the pressure off them, then maybe that might work. Again, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go. But there's a few options in there. Defensively, I think we know he's going to want to pass out from the back. We know that we've seen a couple of times some issues with that. Both centre halves, maybe even all 3 that have played regularly, if we can say that, at this early in the season. We've seen a little bit of issues there. I don't think the left side really looks comfortable with Max Aarons inverting in there. I think he might want a specialist in and move him over to the right. So I think we can see some things. Absolutely, we can see the elements of possession play that we thought were going to be there, without, I guess, wingers who can do exactly what he wants to do on both sides, and without maybe a number 9 who is fully fit, ready to go, all that sort of stuff, which I've not really got for all 3 of them. I think without that, at the minute, it can look a little bit timid, stunted at the top, but some of the signings we've made, more importantly, some of the signings that we're rumoured to make on the wings, if we get them in over the next couple of weeks, I think that could make it really exciting and it could jump it on a level. So yeah, I think it's maybe just as we expected, I think, in terms of the basics and the fundamentals. Have to admit, I've been a little bit surprised at where some of the players are playing. But yeah, I think that's par for the course for basically pre-season.
Davey, the youngster, I think, who's going to come through during this pre-series has been Finlay Curtis, obviously. Another goal for him at the weekend, and a game change, probably a tie-changing game, hopefully. Goal against Panathanaikos on Tuesday night. And it's interesting to me because we're obviously we're strongly linked with Mikey Moore from Tottenham on loan, who's a wide player, although he can play as a number 10. We're also, Raksaki's been mentioned, and Ant-Man, the chap from Go Ahead Eagles, the Finnish international. So he's still looking to boost that up. But Curtis probably shouldn't be playing 50, 60 games this season. It's probably a failure on the rest of the squad if he is. What you want to do with a player that age is to bring him in and he gets 20, 30 appearances, gets a few goals build up, and then next season he moves on again, rather than just being chucked in. And then, when youngsters tend to have a dip in form at some point during their first season, the problem is we've had to play young guys through that, and it's ended up ruining them.
Yeah, look, I think there's no doubt that it's almost on the whole club in terms of not just the manager and the staff, but the other players, senior players, and I think probably even supporters as well, where, around the sort of narrative that we shape for young players. I mean, there's a lengthy list of guys who come on, and, Jamie Ness being one, Kyle Hutton being another, Andy Little, who, sort of were thrown in at the deep end, and some of them actually did quite well for a period of time, and then, the careers almost, dare I say, just go off a cliff. And I think that, Ross McCausland's probably a good example where, 18 months ago, I know Adam was laughing at me, given how effusive I was at my praise of him for obvious reasons. He's from the same part of the world as I am, but I think, Ross McCausland probably thrown in at the deep end, did actually very well to start, got himself into the Northern Ireland squad, started there as well, and then I think sort of has regressed, and we can discuss all the reasons why, but what we don't want is that we have someone like Finlay Curtis this time next year where we don't quite know what we do with him. In an ideal world, you want him almost as a, dare I say, kind of like nailed on starter by this time next year, because he will be managed well throughout the season. And you're entirely right, Davey. Throw that young lad in for 50 odd games, there's a chance he burns out. We do a thing as supporters where we all back him because he's one of our own, and then if things are going south, we start to almost swing the pendulum the other way. So I think it's really important that we kind of remain balanced with him, that we're supportive of him, but we're also realistic about our expectations around him as well.
Yeah, and I think that some of the other young lads that have been in, like Alexander Hutton, I don't think is ready. Josh Gentle, I don't think is ready. Bailey Rice is one who seems to have been in and around the fringes, Davey, of the first team. But to me, is someone who would benefit from a loan, because you can see that there's talent there. But if you like his gameplay at that level, I don't think he quite has. His off the ball work, I don't think is strong enough at the moment. His awareness, and even things like tempo, because it's a far faster game at that level than he'll have played in his career up till now.
Yeah, look, I think probably 2 points. I think, look, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but there probably was an opportunity for the last kind of, 6 to 12 games of the season where, Barry Ferguson and his staff could have given some of these young lads maybe a bit more game time. I know Bailey Rice was probably the one that sort of got the most, but I think, that could have gone one of two ways. It could have, eased them in gently, so to speak, and it could have exposed them to the pressures and the rigours of playing for Rangers, or as I say, they could have been thrown in the deep end, and they could have drowned. I think just to pick up on your point, Davey, about a loan move. I mean, I think Rangers trivia, who was the last successful loanee who left Rangers and came back to establish himself as a long-term Rangers player, and
Alan McGregor.
For me, it's Alan McGregor. Yeah, and the reason why that's fresh in our minds is because Mason Munn's done exactly the same move going to Dunfermline. It worked out really well for Griggsy, and the rest, as I say, is history. But there have been too many lads. I mean, Alex Lowry stands out a year or two ago going to Hearts. Robbie McCrory before that going to Livingston. Players who you think, right, go and grab your opportunity, and for whatever reason, it simply doesn't work out for them. So you're right. It's a catch-22. We probably can't guarantee these guys enough minutes that they require. But in the same sentence, if they go to certain places, it's perhaps very difficult to get back in. And, that's why, I even see locally at Linfield, the amount of lads that have came, even particularly, Linfield, Chris McKee, Cammy Palmer, who have came across on loan and then simply have just stayed because, there hasn't been that opportunity to get back. So it's a fine line, isn't it?
No, absolutely. But moving on then. I mean, at the weekend, Adam, I think that was crystal clear was the team. There is a big gap between the youngsters and squad players and the first team, what we would maybe call recognisably the first team players, which was sort of illustrated when the senior ones came on and, just suddenly, as you say, looked a lot more comfortable with what they were supposed to be doing, kind of, are better players, let's be honest. That's why they are first teamers. And of course, Rangers, come back and get the result. It's not really the result that matters in a friendly. It's a performance. And the performance was, considerably better. And even some of the players like Fernandez looked better with better players around them, which isn't exactly rocket science. That youngsters will definitely improve when they get in a team. But I think we're kind of seeing the guys who were in and around it for Pana, plus new ones who are arriving, and you kind of include Asgard in that because he hasn't played yet, but also the ones that were linked with that will come in. And Russell Martin's been very clear on this, that he's expecting more in the next couple of weeks. He's constantly said it at the weekend again, the squad will look different in a few weeks. I think we've kind of had it in our head, if you like, a wee bit of this tie as being almost our transfer deadline. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. In an ideal world, we'd have everybody in, but realistically, I think Rangers will be involved in the transfer window right up till it closes, both ins and outs. But I mean, I think that you're very much seeing, if you like, the nucleus of the squad that Russell Martin has to build on, and that there are some players who, for various reasons, some at a stage of their career where they're not ready to be first team players, others who just doesn't look as though it's perhaps going to work for. And, we saw that at the weekend with the departure of one of them already, Robin Proper.
Yeah, I think so. The team sheet that came out obviously were in the programme. I'm not sure what it was in, but it was enormous. It showed how many players we've got. Okay, 10 plus of them maybe are academy players, but they've still been in and around the pre-season. Most of them have been involved in games, so it still does show how big the squad is. I think there's probably, off the top of my head, 7 or 8 players in the first team squad that you would class as first team players that could go, and maybe even half of them you might not even need a replacement for in terms of what their contributions have been, unfortunately. So yeah, it's huge. In terms of how pre-season has gone transfer wise, I always say I want all the big players in before pre-season starts, or at least before you go to the training camp. And I know how unreasonable it is, but that's just what I think would work best. So there is an element of buying as you go or selling as you go, and it's tricky. I think this tie in Wednesday night it was huge anyway, obviously, but I think that might set that benchmark, if you like, David. Not a transfer deadline by any respect, but at least you sort of know then what your minimum earnings are going to be. I think just now we know what our minimum earnings are going to be, and they're not very good. There is a chance that we could go out completely from Europe, but just if you get through this game, and it just needs to be a draw to get through the game on Wednesday night, then you've got a full month of the window left, and bare minimum we're guaranteed Europa League group phase. We know how much money we get from that. We can calculate that into all the finances. Obviously, we have a little bit more extra money than we had last year with the investment that's been put in, and we've got a couple of players there that I have to admit I'm surprised that we've not made a big sale yet, but it's good in a sense that we're holding values. There's risks to that. We spoke before about Raskin in terms of risks of either not signing contracts, losing form, maybe even losing his place if other people are coming in and they potentially suit the system more or they play better. All these things. So I'm a bit surprised there's not been a little bit more noise or concrete offers around maybe Raskin and Igaman, which would obviously amp the budget up again. So yeah, there's a lot of moving factors, but I think a really important part is just getting through this game on Wednesday, seeing what the baseline is that we've got to work with, and then hopefully adding in these quality players that are being rumoured, whether they're on loans, obligations, options, whether they're straight buys. I think the next phase of this, we sort of built the foundations, if you like, but the next phase of this for me is going out and getting the guys that you think, okay, can it be a centre half? Can it be a left back? Can it be 2 wingers? Let's go out and get them. And whether you're spending serious money or not, I'm not sure, but we're getting the best players that we can attract for those positions.
Davey, you've been around football clubs at this time of the year. How much is that state of flux? Does it really just, is it expected and it settles down once the window's over? Is it something now that football clubs almost build into the annual preparations that this is just going to be the way it is?
Yeah, look, I think Adam's entirely right. I think one point I'd make to start with is that, I have a bit of a concern that, and I'm not going to name names, but there's what, a dozen players who probably roll off the tongue, Davy, that, you would, pretty much you would shed no tears at them going. And I think that's part of an issue is actually, yes, bringing in quality, but it's probably also trimming the fat. I think in regards to kind of, lists, and there'll be many names linked to Rangers, both directly and indirectly, for a wide range of reasons. And I think that every club has got lists. They've got long lists in every position. Then they've got short lists, and players that they then want to specifically target. And those names will probably change. For probably 2 to 3 reasons. One, our European progress, which is the obvious one. Two, anyone that we are able to sell for decent money, or sell or get rid of, whatever you want to put it. And I think then three, what the manager's sort of longer term plans are for current positions. So, for example, the fullbacks, is McLaren's there to sort of transition Tav out and reduce his games over time. If we were to bring a left back in, it's probably because, the likes of Yilmaz is going to move on potentially back to Turkey. So there are a lot of moving parts, and I think until, two things, I think, David, you and I probably coined the phrase in the past, until you see the scarf above the head, the signing's not done. Just ask Jamie Murphy back all those years ago. And I think secondly, and probably more importantly, it's not over until, as Jim White puts it, the transfer window slams shut at the end of August.
Yeah, and this is something that all clubs have got to deal with. And, you see it, even down south, that there are huge players who are still potentially on the move, even though we're getting very close towards the kickoff. Right, turning then to Wednesday night, massive game for us. We got in a good position. We're 2-0 up. Could have been different, Adam. I'm not going to shed any tears for Panathanaikos because, I'm not, for obvious reasons. I want them to go out of the competition at this stage. But I think that, we could have conceded early, and it's a totally different game. We managed to ride that out and improve and get ourselves into it, and we are in a good position. But I really don't think it's been controversial to say that we're going to need to defend better than we did on Tuesday night. Again, it's time. How do you approach this game? Because I think we will need to score, and I don't think that we can go there and put 10 men behind the ball and get the result we need. Wonderful if we can, by the way, but I'm not sure that. I think we will need to score over there. So, I mean, how do you approach it? Do you play your normal game? Do you make tactical decisions that are made to tighten us up, an extra midfielder, I don't know, whatever, a deeper line team? Or do you go out there and say, no, we'll play the way we want to play and we'll be confident that this will be enough?
Well, this is where I think it's really interesting. It's just another insight into how the manager is going to want to set up, because over on Patreon, myself and Ali talked a little bit about the Panathinaikos home leg and maybe looking ahead to this leg, and I caught myself saying maybe we'll play Rothwell and Raskin a little bit deeper, and we'll go with two wingers and try and hit on the counter attack. And Ali was like, well, yeah, but we've hired this possession manager that everybody said last year was so inflexible and wouldn't change his approach in big games in England, much to his detriment. Why would we expect him to suddenly come out with, let's be honest, a kind of Philippe Clement type 4-2-3-1, where you want to get the ball forward and you're expecting to defend? Russell Martin, for me, it's probably more realistic, and it'll be interesting to see. He spoke about how he's changed or how he's wanting to get more involved in the dark arts and have more athletic profiles. Be interesting to see if he comes out and says, we're playing our own way. We're not going to be here to try and sneak a draw. We want the ball. We want to have as much of the ball as we can, which again is not something we're really used to in Europe, but we want to dominate possession, and the theory that the opposition can't score if you don't give them the ball is absolutely valid. So I think that's going to be really interesting, because we've then got the attacking profiles that we mentioned. None of the players that were fit to start last week are, well, other than Igaman, he's maybe got a little bit of a knock, as we know, but the rest of them, your Dessers, your Gassama, guys like that, should be fit enough to play 90 minutes. I would have thought now this midweek. Whether they do or not is up for debate. So it's sort of interesting to see how it works. I think I would personally go with two wide players, whether it's Gassama and Curtis. I know Cortez, the manager, made a point of saying showed up fairly well at the weekend there after maybe not being about for a couple of weeks in terms of appearances. Gassama and Cortez wide, and then play a sort of your own game in the middle. It's going to be really interesting to see how he sets it up. But I do think he won't just throw out his principles 100%. He'll look to dominate the ball regardless of where he's playing. Whether or not we can then tighten up defensively, like you mentioned, is a big factor as well. Because let's be honest, it could have been 2, maybe even 3 now down if we're honest at half time. We've been punished in the friendlies, and if we've been punished in 2 of the friendlies, if we don't get punished in the first 2 competitive games, then that'll do for me.
Davey, it really is. I'd love to see a great performance, barnstorm and everything clicking, but it is just get through this by hook or by crook, really, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. Look, F spots and maybes, but we won that game 2-0 last week. I don't think, if I'm honest, we necessarily deserve to win it 2-0, nor so do I think we deserve to lose 2-0. But on another night, as Adam said, we definitely rode our luck. We're going to ride our luck even probably more so out in Greece. I think that the one issue is that we look very vulnerable when we lose the ball. And I think that, Adam's entirely right. Well, the opposition can't score if they don't have the ball, but we have been slack at times, and we probably should have been punished for it by Panathanaikos last week. So, it is a very difficult one. I think we're all probably looking maybe with kind of one eye shut at Russell Martin to sort of say, look, we're not asking necessarily for a Walter performance and to play, 5 centre backs and 4 full backs, but in the same sentence, if we're going to go out and if he is going to repeat some of the mistakes that he made in the Premiership last year, we could be on the wrong side of a 2-0 and you're into extra time and potentially a lottery of penalties. So it'll probably be a lot to see if he is, dare I say, matured, or if he's going to remain, I suppose, fixed in what he believes in. And I'm not necessarily saying that's wrong, but I'm saying, ultimately, as the great Walter Smith said, just win. And I think that, on Wednesday night, all we've got to do, as you say, is be in the next round, whatever way you get there.
Yeah, for me, it's ball retention, Adam. It's always ball retention in European football, because, with all due respect, again, some Walter said you can give the ball away domestically and you'll probably get it back quite quickly. You give the ball away in Europe, it might be 15 minutes before you see it again. Now, obviously, he was joking, but there's a real kernel of truth in that. And the amount of times Rangers teams over the years have done that and struggled in Europe because of it. Better Rangers teams than we've seen recently. But yet recently, I have to say, the last 6-7 years, we have a culture, though, of going abroad with no fear and being confident in our ability to play in tight spaces. And it's where somebody like Diamandi, for example, who can take the ball in a half turn and get you up the park, is very useful. And something that you really need that Gassama can do, maybe Curtis as well, is that they can run with the ball, and you need that. Last season we had Cherny, before we did well in Europe we had Kent, because he gets you out of your half. If the game's played entirely in your half, the pressure builds and builds and builds in the atmosphere, whereas if you're constantly asking them questions at the other end, you increase your chances exponentially.
I think so, and I think Gassama is key to that. I have spent more hours than I'd like to admit over the weekend writing a pretty long read on what I think he can, how he's done at Sheffield Wednesday, what I think he can bring to Rangers. And the standout thing is dribbling, ball carrying, dominating his man, 1v1. He just, from what I've seen, there's not going to be any of the, I might cut back and I might play into the midfielder. It's just give me the ball and I'm going to go. So to me, that is tailor-made to this game on Wednesday. I'll be hoping he starts. If he starts on the right, starts on the left, I don't really mind, but what an outball that could be in theory if we need it. But I think you're right. Keeping the ball will be key. Diamandi, Rothwell in the middle there, asking if he plays in terms of getting the ball forwards, but having someone like Gassama there who you can just launch it to or give it to, as we've seen with the goal at the last midweek, give him the ball and let him go. I think that could be crucial if he ends up being as good as we hope.
Right then, folks, that will do us here for this week here on Heart and Hand. We'll be back next Monday, of course, and after we've taken on Motherwell in our opening game of the league season. But Cammy will be here later in the week to go through what happens over there in Greece. Just a wee reminder that if you want to hear more from us in the build-up to that, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/Heart and Hand, and sign up from just $1.99 per month. And also, you can come and see us in a live show, our 15th anniversary show on August the 15th at Edmiston House. Tickets available from their website. My thanks to our producers, Mike Lee and Paul Myers, and my thanks to my two splendid guests. First of all, David Graham, lovely to have you back.
Cheers, Davey. It's good to be back, and I'll hopefully listeners will hear from me again soon.
Oh, they were. This is like when Stephen Davis come back. That's how we're comparing that one. That level of return. You know, definitely not like when Richard Foster come back.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, Kyle Lafferty. Yeah.
And Adam, thank you very much. And where can listeners find that article?
It's on Substack, which is I don't know if it's new now, but it's on my Substack. You can find it on my Twitter, Adamski152, and you'll find the links there.
Thanks for listening, folks. Mon the Gers. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.